Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. I hope you are still awake and can bear with me for my presentation a little bit. So for this particular session, I have decided to speak about Islamic education in Singapore, my reflection as a madrasah graduate. So next slide, please. This will be my outline for today. I will first go through the educational trajectory, my educational trajectory, followed by a bit of the overview of Islamic education development in Singapore. But Ustazah Bushra has mentioned more in detail, so I will just briefly go through that. And finally, my reflections. So you can go to the next two slides. Okay, this is my educational trajectory. I was enrolled in Madrasah Al-Ma'arif Al-Islamiyah in 2003, which then I stayed there for 12 years. I did my A-levels and then I went to MUIS to pursue my studies in political science as well as religious studies. So when it comes to the topic of Islamic education or Islamic discourses, I think that my educational trajectory has allowed me to, grasp different perspectives. So when I was in madrasah, of course, I was more exposed to the core tenets of beliefs, theology and Sharia. But when I was in NUS and I had to take modules for religious studies, I studied Islam as a phenomenon, and I was more exposed to the issues that confront the community. So I studied, Islam as a phenomenon sociologically and historically. So rather than finding these two, finding all the perspectives contradictory to each other, I find that it actually enriches my perspective and widens my perspectives. So this is just a bit of introduction, just so, for the reflection part later, where I'm coming from. So next slide. Okay, so on the overview of development of Islamic education, maybe you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so if today, when we talk about Islamic education, what exists in our imagination is usually the 6 madrasas, right? But actually, just over a century ago, madrasas didn't even exist. Religious learning was more informal through Quranic classes. I think it's very early in the 20th century, about 1905, where the first madrasa was being formed. So, but because the idea of a formal religious education was very foreign at that time, so people were not very receptive, towards madrasa. But over time, the idea was being normalized, and we came to a point today where if we talk about religious education, it's very impossible to not imagine or talk about the 6 madrasas. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so these are just some of the developments of madrasa and religious education in general. We have seen rise and fall of the development. So from 1930s to 1960s, I think this was the peak of religious education or madrasa education, where we see the emergence of many religious teachers, scholars, and even elites. But when independence came, the number of enrollment in madrasa, it decreased, because of many new national schools that were being formed. So ultimately, by 1980s, there were only 6 madrasas that continued to exist. So, and then in the late 1980s to the 1990s, there were talks about reforms in madrasa, and this is basically because of the government's pursuit for economic progress. And as we know, education is a means to build, or rather to equip students with the necessary skills to participate in the economy. So when they take a look at the madrasa, they realize that there were many gaps. As much as there were good madrasa students, who excelled, but there were also a number of dropouts that were quite high. So then they realized that there is a need to, make sure that the curriculum fits better in our bigger economic pursuit. And if I can say this rather not very nicely, there were some madrasas also that were nowhere here nor there, whereby they were not producing religious scholars, but at the same time, they were also not producing students who are good enough to partake in the economy. So I think this was when the Compulsory Education Act, they were first talking about it and eventually implemented in 2003. And as someone who was enrolled in madrasa in 2003, I was the first cohort to take PSLE under that particular act. And I remember how stressful the moment was for the community in general. So now, moving on to the 21st century, there were many other challenges that the community had to face. And this is, basically influenced by the wider developments out there, such as September 11, global war on terror. So everywhere else, including in Singapore, the Muslim community is always put under the spotlight, and our madrasah education or religious education it was being questioned. So where do we go on from here? Can I go to the next slide? So the contemporary challenges that we face today is always about how to maintain the relevance of our education. And basically the question that I'm trying to tackle here is how can madrasas produce students who are capable of contextualizing religious knowledge in the context of change and development? So this is where my reflections come in. The next slide. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so having been in a madrasah and then moving on to pursue my studies in MUIS and now researching on the Muslim community, it gives me a better understanding of not just religion itself, but the different dynamics, that shape religion and that affect us ultimately. So number one, my reflection is that our approach towards studying jurisprudence and theology, I think, can be better improved. In madrasah education, we learn theology and Sharia in a quite legalistic manner. And by legalistic, I mean here is to establish moral right or wrong. And to some extent, when we learn something from the historical past, it's not being put into perspective. So let me give you an example in the next slide. Okay, one example is that we learn the emergence of different firqah, or different factions in the history of Islam. So the emergence of Shia, Khawarij, Mu'tazila, and so on and so forth. And what we usually do in these classes is to learn the doctrines, maybe certain key figures, and then basically to point out the flaws of these arguments. But actually what we are missing out is that, this kind of studies is quite simplistic. We are missing out many other complexities, such as what are the political factors that affect the emergence of this firqah, because this firqah is not just there, they do not just form their own opinions on certain issues like predestination, but there are political factors that shape, the emergence, and also at certain time there can be certain firqah that is dominating the society, and all these have to do with different political factors at that time. And then another thing that I think we are missing out if we are studying the firqah in a simplistic manner is that their doctrine actually reflects a deeper philosophical debates that were happening at that time. So people were discussing Islam vis-a-vis science, Islam vis-a-vis rationality, the idea of predestination. So what the doctrine that we learn today, that they produce, is actually a product of thinking of that time. They're basically the endeavor to try to understand the reality and make sense of religion. Okay, let's go to the next two slides. The other one? Okay, another reflection that I have is that in our curriculums, whether it's in formal madrasah education or just part-time madrasah, I realized that we do not talk about Islam in Southeast Asia. And the realization only hit me when I was in MUIS taking a module specifically talking about these developments. That's when I realized, hey, why didn't we learn this in madrasah? It's important part of our traditions and history. And I think this is my own hypothesis, if I may, that one of the reasons why we cannot make sense of Islam in Singapore today is partly because of the absence of this whole discourse of Islam in Southeast Asia. Whereas actually, Islam has always been here for quite a number of centuries. There were many key figures. They debated a lot on various issues, including the issue of liberation of women. However, we are not exposed to that discourse. And because of the lack of understanding, sometimes I feel that we are scrambling to find answers again when it has actually been discussed even a century ago. So this is something I think we should take a look. But thankfully, I realized that the awareness on the importance of this particular discourse is already here. So I think we are moving towards a direction of trying to incorporate or trying to normalize our own history. There is no, one factor as to why this happened, why we neglect our own history. Personally, I think it's because of colonialism as well as independence. When Singapore gained independence, we wanted to do nation building. So parts of our history are quite neglected, including our own Malay history and our religious history. My last reflection, in the next slide, it's about a space to question or a room to question. Sometimes you have religious teachers who are open enough to receive questions and encourage you to ask questions, but oftentimes also we realize that the space for question is not there. They will tell you not to question what they teach you. Whereas actually, from my own reflection, questioning, even in the most fundamental core tenets of your beliefs, is actually a way to develop your intellectual capacity. And as a Muslim, I think through questioning, deliberation, and critical thinking, that's when you will, regain new insights and basically be more confident about what you believe in as a Muslim. So to conclude, if you want to talk about, in the context of maintaining relevance of religious knowledge, maybe you go to the last slide. Okay, so if you want to maintain the relevance of religious knowledge, and we are always questioning about how do we contextualize, I think it's important to look at some of the gaps, some of the approach that we learn in theology and Sharia. We don't necessarily have to do big changes because, like Dr. Tuty said, institutional changes will take time. There are many constitutions on that front, but we can do smaller changes in classes by using the same books. So emphasis on the context of learning at that time, or rather context of the phenomenon that we were learning in class. So I think in that way, we expose them to more complexities of the matter, and that can help in equipping students with the necessary knowledge and skills to contextualize religious knowledge in the future. I think that's all my reflections for today. For the last slide, moving on to the last slide, the other one. Okay, so I have compiled a bit of a list of readings on Islamic education in Singapore. It's not much, it's not exhaustive, but yeah, I just compiled for the sake of your own references. I have also included my email in case you need the PDF versions of those readings. So that is all from me. Thank you so much for listening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Shafiqa, for sharing your insights and reflections on your experience both in the religious education sector as well as beyond after that. So there is the three key points that you highlighted: the focus on theology and jurisprudence in religious studies, the lack of understanding or exposure to Islam in Southeast Asia, and then number three, the space to question, which I think is the most important, because right now we realize that we need leaders who are able to lead the community, because we want to empower the community to make their own religious decisions, but informed and with a critical mindset. So how do you then groom the religious leaders to be able to confidently groom a Muslim community which is confident itself to then interpret how they should go about and navigate religious life in the contemporary society? Okay, so on that note, I believe we have a lot of questions that we might have to share, or even comments and inputs.
Now we will start with the Q&A segment. Can we have all the panelists as well as Dr. Tuty to be on the stage? For the Q&A segment. All right. Any questions so far?
Thank you very much to all of the panelists for your presentations. They were all very interesting. And I appreciated what all of you had to say. I just have, I think, two questions. And I'm not going to direct them to anyone in particular. I'm going to leave it to you to decide who to answer. But the first question, Ustazah Bushra was talking about how a mindset change is needed. And it's not just about, that mindset is supposed to be about how Islamic education should not just be for the sake of making us better Muslims or more knowledgeable about Islam, but also recognizing that it's supposed to be for the betterment of society, yes? And that's more, it's mindset, it's mental, it's psychological. I'm also wondering how do you see it, either one of you, how do you see it in the practical, tangible sense? In what ways should this mindset change manifest in a practical sense? Beyond curriculum changes, for example, what else do you think we can do? The second question is, I think Brother Shafiq and also Shafiqa, you talked about how we need to learn different things, right, in the madrasas or through the platform of Islamic education. I think also Ustazah Bushra on your slides, you were saying how some madrasas still don't teach science and geography or something like that? In the 90s, okay. But how feasible do you think it is for us to be able to introduce all of these changes? I know, yes, institutional change takes time, but these sort of new introductions into the curriculum, whether it's about literature or whether it's about Islamic history in Southeast Asia and so on and so forth, how feasible do you think it is? And based on your interactions, whether it's with community leaders or other asatizah or your students and their parents, what sort of reception do you think, or how receptive do you think they would be to such changes?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, regarding the first question, regarding beyond curriculum change, what could be done? As a madrasah student myself, one thing that I noticed, or maybe let me just explain a little bit about my education. I studied in Malaysia for about, I think, until my primary 5, and then I went to Jordan, where I studied in a private Islamic school. And then I came back to Singapore and continued my studies in Madrasah Al-Junaid. So what I mentioned about Madrasah Al-Junaid not having science and geography, that was the truth about that time, early 2000. Yes. Another perspective that maybe I would like to also share was that throughout my life, before I studied in Singapore madrasas, I had this vision and this interest in becoming a scientist. That was my lifetime dream. And when I was in Malaysia, I saw that that was achievable. And when I went to Jordan, it became even more achievable in that private Islamic school where we wear scarves and jubas instead of the, the skirts where the other schools were wearing. I saw that as something that was possible. And then when I came back into Madrasah Al-Junaid, and I'm not saying this to throw shade on Madrasah Al-Junaid or anything, but the Islamic education suddenly becomes something that is very, very narrow. And it is, like Brother Shafiq said, theology. It is about the Quran. And bear in mind that until secondary 1, I never felt that Islamic knowledge was only limited to the Quran and the Hadith and the fiqh and no, it was not limited to that. It was everything, which is why I wanted to be a scientist. I love science. And in Jordan, I had that opportunity to work and to stay in the science lab as long as I wanted. We were doing research and doing this and studies, and we were writing report. And I came back to Singapore, and we get to do that once a week. Once a week. And I started losing interest in it. And then when I wanted to take O-levels, they were like, okay, you need to stay back after school. And I was like, no, this is impossible for me because I have 4 siblings that I need to get home together with me after school. So I do not have that opportunity. So the opportunity was taken at that time. Now, obviously, the opportunities are given. But I still feel like the majority of Muslim parents and students, the majority of them, I'm not saying all of them, still have that mentality that if I put you in a madrasa, I want you to be an ustad. And an ustad only, and I mean, dare not be or think about being a Muslim ustad scientist. Like, what in the world is that? Because then you'll be, modernized and westernized and secularized or whatever it is that it means. So for me, that change of mindset is really important. And I think that because now schools and madrasas are providing that opportunity already, it is still, we're still seeing only handfuls of madrasa students who are venturing out. The majority of them are still, going through that traditional I would say the path, and it's because it is easy. And it's because we are very comfortable. It is because that if you, at that time, I'm asking myself right now, if at that time I wanted to pursue science after Madrasah Al-Junaid pre-university, which was after 17 now, or 18. Yes, I graduated at 18. So after 18 years old, I'll have to resit my O-levels as a private candidate, take all the pure sciences like I wanted to, and and it was too difficult. It was like all my friends are already in year 1 and year 2 of university, and I'm afraid. So I was like, it's okay, never mind, just go to Al-Azhar. It's okay. Maybe I'll get to that later, but life and comes back, and the responsibility and this and that. And even then I think I did have that problem going back into that religious stream, because even when I came back from Al-Azhar, I did not go back into the religious stream. Instead I worked something else, and I was focusing more on language and stuff like that. But to me, it is not that the religion is the problem or the education system is the problem. Now, even though the education system is providing ways for people to reach to their, whatever it is that they are, not limiting them to that particular, like Islamic studies is this, or what is stated in the curriculum as this. You must go to Al-Azhar and graduate and stuff like that. But that mindset is still there. I still have people or parents who feel like, why are we focusing on maths? Why are we forcing the children to focus on maths? And why are they learning maths like they are going for the maths Olympiad? Parents are asking this question, and I'm like, why not? Why not? Oh, because, we're madrasah, they should study fiqh, jurisprudence. They should study the seerah, the history of the Prophet, instead of the history of Singapore. Why? Why limit them to Islamic history? And, and the worst thing for me right now, and I see this as a crisis, is the problem of not being able to find your identity. In the end, you come out from the madrasah not knowing who you are. Like I think Sister Shafiqah mentioned beautifully, and I think this is very sensitive, but I'll say it anyways. You are neither good at the Islamic studies, you are basic. Seriously, like comparing to people from Jordan, I would say people who graduated in Islamic sciences, like really Islamic theology, Islam in hadith, in Quran, or in exegesis, in tafsir, or in any religious knowledge. If you compare a Singapore Muslim scholar to the scholars in the West, maybe, or the scholar in the East, maybe, there is a huge gap. And then we are not also good. We have an identity problem. We do not know Singapore, and we do not know anything else. Yeah, I will pass it back to you. I'm so sorry.
I'll add on before I pass it on to you, because Ustazah has already shared on her experience. I just wanted to tap on the opportunity here, because you also studied overseas, right? So based on your respective experiences studying overseas, and how, and also when you basically moved out from the stream, how can the Singapore model of Islamic education be seen as better? Where are the areas where we have done well? I mean, we see the gaps, but where have we actually done well? And then perhaps you can also reflect on then your experience when you've outstream. I think you mentioned briefly that it complemented the initial years of religious education, but yeah, where have we done well in general?
Hello. Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Tuty. And the questions the question which was raised by our sister, I think after 12 years of my studies in madrasa, I really had a culture shock when I go to Turkey, because it was my first time where I realized that the 12 years of my life studying religion is more of a dogmatic religion, where this is right, this is wrong. And I'll give you an example just now when Sis Shafiqah was showing me that book, Firqah Sesat, is it? Okay, so when I was studying there, I still remember my professor forbids us to write, example, he forbids us to write Sayyidina Ali or Imam Ali. He just instructed us to write Ali. Why is it like this? It's because to have an objective view on the situation. And why is it is very important to have such an objective view is so that we can see the situation of that era in a wider perspective. So in madrasa, I don't know today, but during my time, I think our time is almost the same, right? Yeah, I think 2000. Yeah, okay. So during our time is, we studied religion in a dogmatic format. This is right, this is wrong. Example, I give you an example. Everyone knows, I think most of us knows the term Mu'tazila, right? Do you know the term Mu'tazila is being named to them? But do you know their original name? Why do they name themselves? Do we know? We don't, right? Why? It's because we learn from Al-Milal wa Nihal, the book, which is predominantly on Sunni perspective. But then they name themselves as Ahlul Ra'yi wal Adl. It's like logical thinkers in short. So that's the term. The terminology is really important so that we know what is where we come from. Example, like if I were to give you this symbol, okay? Okay, this symbol. How many will say this is 3? Some will say it's 3. Some will say 0. Some will say 6. Some will say 9. Isn't it right? Can we say someone who says 6 or 3 is wrong? No, it's the same of religion itself. Islamic education or religious education, we need to refine it in terms of we need to really teach our kids to be more curious on religion, not a dogmatic religion, such as this is haram, this is halal. Yes, we need to teach that, but we need to teach beyond that. An example, I still remember, in madrasa, they have this concept of memorizing. And during my time, I think I'm just 2 years below Ustad Zul Fadli. Yeah. So during that time in Madrasah Wat Tanjung, I still remember we learned Fiqhul Manhaji. So in the Fiqhul Manhaji, he focused us on memorizing. I'm not a good student in terms like I will always ask questions and they will Ustazah will not like me. I'm the type of that student. It's because I will always sleep in class. And the Ustazah will ask me, like, why do you always sleep in class? During my lesson, because to study fiqh. Then I told Ustazah straight, Ustazah, I know what you're going to do is you're going to just read to me, translate it. At the end of the year, just memorize it. And then if I don't listen to your translation or explanation, I can just pass because I can just memorize. It's not an issue because they will ask, what is salah, ta'rifus salah, lughatan wa istilahan. And then this all memorization. And it totally against what we need in current world. And then they proceed to go to Al-Azhar. Sorry, Zah? No. They proceed to go to Azhar. They proceed to go to Middle East where heavily focus on memorization. And what comes out from them, sorry to say, is just like a broken recorder. And that's where it prohibits or prevents someone to think beyond text. And the text they read is also Sunni predominant thought. And not only Sunni, even some of them, if you study in Brunei, focus on Shafi'i thought. And this is beyond the plural society of Singapore. That's what we need actually, to have a curiosity mind, to teach religion beyond dogmatic. And that's what we need so that we have confidence in our religious scholars. Thank you. And just on to second question is, when I studied in Turkey, it was totally a culture shock because in Wat Tanjung, we emphasize on hadith a lot. We studied Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmizi. And then suddenly when it was my first semester, third year, I started to see the names like Iqnat Golzaya. And it was totally a shock for me, but it was a good wake-up call. That to see religion beyond theological or beyond text, and at the same time, not only beyond text, to learn after we learn the theological aspect, we also we also deep rooted to the current events of the world, and look it beyond in social sciences, like example anthropology. It's my first time to study Sirah from an anthropological perspective. It was really we call it amazing, and I really hope that that's where we're going to move so that we have a community who is confident to talk about religion and not only preaching but also sharing actually. Thank you so much.
Hello. Okay, just a bit to address the questions by our sister about how do you translate, that we have students that think about the betterment of society in tangible sense, I think it's really about exposure. As we know, madrasas, the demographic of a madrasa is such that we are all Muslims, even though the races may differ, and we are predominantly Sunni. So the exposure to the various communities out there is important, and I think there is a move towards this. Even during my time, there were times where we had to go for conferences, but it was really just once in a while, quite superficial. Today, I know that, for instance, Madrasah Al-Ma'arif have like consistent effort in trying to engage as I think Chung Ching High School. So from time to time, they will go to each other's school and try to engage in various ways. I think this is one of the ways that we can do. Really, I think it's the effort of the madrasa itself. Doesn't have to be institutional change. Okay, in terms of reconciling my perspectives, right, when it comes to religion from various, whether it's theology or learning them from a sociological perspective, I think my upbringing personally was a key feature in this lah. So I had never grown up in a way where I see that Islamic and secular were separate, because that's how my parents taught me Islam. But also I think that when you study sociological perspective of religion, it really just makes you understand, okay, why you believe in a certain thing, what has developed that, what has shaped that development. Of course, you may change certain perspectives here and there, but I think that is just for the betterment of yourselves lah. Yeah.
Your respective inputs, and I believe you've also highlighted the practical sense, right? What are the addressing the question, how do you see it in a practical sense beyond the curriculum changes as well? And it has to go actually beyond the classroom for sure. But I also kind of gleaned something from your sharings, is the fact that because of the way the system was before, and this is not the first time I've heard whereby they actually get questioned, why are you questioning, why are you sleeping in my class? And then they get penalized because the way they were thinking were not really aligned with the previous system, right? So then, which brings us back to the second question that Afra actually asked, in terms of the receptiveness, right? We know that during your times, your respective times, you actually felt that discomfort, right? And you, some of you down here also kind of confronted your teachers, right? So how do you, I see this, there is a layer of religious graduates, a cohort of them who are between a rock and a hard place, meaning if you want to introduce these changes, you're not just going to go against your previous teachers, but the ones who are out there, I'm not going to see you on the same stage. So what about this receptiveness, and how do you sense about it? How do you remedy the interim transition period? Because you're technically in the transition period. You've identified the gaps and you see the changes coming, but you are still in the interim. So how do you feel that this is what are the changes that can be done? Yeah, so we give you about, maybe just keep your answer short, then after that we can open back to the floor. So prepare your questions, yeah? We still have time for that. Please.
Okay, can I hear the question again? Sorry. I was a bit, remedy. Yeah. The change. Yes. Yeah. I think number one is what I think is lacking, and I feel is lacking, is that willingness to explore and the daringness to go out. Even for Asatizahs ourselves, we are very, because we learn in such a very, like Brother Shafiq said, it's in a dogmatic kind of way, where we understand that we are confined by these thoughts and these ways, and the ways of teachers. Until today, I still do feel like a lot of Asatizahs are confined in their own way. They do not dare to explore, they do not dare to go out, and they do not dare to voice out. Even when you find something that is maybe factually wrong about what you have learned, like factually wrong, nobody would even speak about it. They would like rather, just sweep it under the carpet. So I think what's important is that to instill that in the upcoming, or the Asatizahs that are going to be coming next, in the next generation. Maybe for the ones that are now, we can only speak to them, we can only encourage them to be more, to read more, to learn more, to be more open-minded. Like Brother Shafiq said, like if you read other books, and like when I myself was in Jordan, we were learning from different people of different backgrounds. We are not learning from Muslim teachers only. It's not limited to Muslim teachers. Therefore, you have a different, like you understand that, oh, I can actually learn and benefit so much from a teacher that is not even a Muslim. Whereas when you are in a madrasa, you are like, okay, only Muslims are right. Like, maybe, it doesn't, they don't say it in that manner, it's not much of a word there, but you kind of feel like, I cannot imagine myself learning from a person other than a Muslim. Because I might not trust them, maybe, I don't know. Maybe their information might be wrong. And I do not dare to learn something that is wrong or question my teachers, you see? And that kind of mentality needs to go and needs to move. And we need to create a generation of students who are inquisitive, who ask questions. And it also means that the teachers have to keep on learning and increasing their knowledge and read, or else they will be left. Yeah, I think that's it.
I want to add something. I fully concur with whatever Asatizah Berwarisan said. But also I think that, when some teachers, they don't want to ask the question, it's also partly maybe because they are not prepared to answer the questions. They don't have the necessary resources. So one thing that we can do is for those who have, more exposure on these areas, for probably sociology perspective of religion and all that, it's important to kind of list out the resources to them so that they can read out on their own and, add that in their classes. So these are some of the ways that we can do. But also when it comes to change, patience is very important. We are not doing this to see the fruits in 2 years. Definitely is for the next generation. Some people with very dogmatic views, of course, it's very difficult for them to change. We are not dealing with them. We just remember that we are doing this for our future generation. That's always, I think, my intention.
Okay, so actually, the place I'm sitting now is I'm meeting Ustazah Bushra and Shafiqah actually. Do you know that actually, when it comes to religious discourse, I may have, and it's actually quite a number of time, right, Ustazah, where we have different views actually. And the views comes from Ustazah's experience as an Usuluddin and Sharia, living in the Middle East, and me in Turkey, who is secular country. So the views we had is totally, sometimes it can be opposite, right, Iza? Yeah, but then we learn from each other actually. Yeah. And some of the things about Southeast Asia, because I just came back from Turkey after 9 years, I learned from Shafiqah actually. So the thing I can say is, nothing is constant actually. And the thing which only is constant is only change actually. Like we tend to see that, we are protecting the religion, the tradition, because this is religion. But actually we want to protect the religion itself, but then without we realizing it, actually we're destroying the religion from inside. When there's no questions, when there's no inquisitivity, when we cannot ask religious scholars, or we cannot even question their writings. And in order to, if you look at the history of Islamic civilization, or I can say the Middle East civilization, so if you look, how do they, example the Abbasid period, how they become the golden age of Islam is because they are really into translation of Greek words, Persians. Even India, they have a book called Kalila wa Dimma. They go to China and they translate works. They go to Egypt, they go to even Africa, they go to Europe, they translate their works. When they translate their works, don't you think that, this is against Islam? No, they don't do that. It's for the benefit of the society. And that's from those translation, they bore the golden age of Islam. And just want to add just now, when I mentioned about the canon, which being made during the time of Siege of Constantinople. Do you know the canon itself, which is 5 meter long, 18 kilogram or 18 ton. And it was so big, it was being made by a Hungarian Christians. And we worked together. But now if we were to question this, it would this is non, we look at the word in this is Muslim, this is non-Muslim. No, it doesn't work like this. Okay, that's all for me.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the floor? Please, Ustaz.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Abdul Manaf. I think what I heard just now from 3 panelists about their experience in madrasa, way forward, I think got some main problems in our education system. what I can see, because I also involved in I'm a former principal of Madrasah Al Arabiya. What I can see, the very essential in education is the concept of knowledge. I think the concept of Iqra in the Quran. And this in our, I think not only in madrasah system, as the overall is Islamic education for the formal education and informal education. I think the mosque, the private institution play a role in terms of to inculcate Islamic education, in terms of the concept of knowledge and how they can translate all this in their life. We learn Quran, we learn Hadith, and so on. How that we relate this in our life. I think that is some not so clear in our Islamic education. That one aspect. Secondly, what I can see, how we can develop our curriculum in terms of development of the context of our time today and also for our next generation. How that our Islamic education can develop that Islam is really rahmatan lil alamin. How that they learn what faith or hadith or what, how they relate to the human relation. I think that's missing in our education, Islamic education. But what I can see that we hope that next time we have as a country, we have a system, the system of education, how in the formal setting and the informal setting. I think that's very important for the community to develop together. If not, I can see that that's why the understanding of Islam, or Islam is only for the ritual and not for the life and so on. And I hope our new generation can see Islam as a rahmatil alamin, and also we have a message, and what you all said through your experience, you studied overseas, at least brought our mind and
openly with that mind, and but still have that core value of Islam deep inside. They are grounded, and I think that's what MUIS, I think I can find it on, I can still remember seeing it in MUIS website, is that to create a generation of Muslim with strong core values, yet with an open mind. They have an open mind. They serve the community. They understand the importance of being a Muslim and a Singaporean and a member of the community. I think that's all.
From my experience in Turkey, being in madrasa, what happened is usually because of the school of thought in Southeast Asia, which is when there's a problem, first they need to refer back to the Quran, Sunnah, and then finally the Ra'i, or the logic. This is what happened in Southeast Asia, right? And especially in Singapore. But when I was back in Turkey, I still remember there was a debate on, it was 2013. There was a debate on hijab issue. When it comes to hijab issue, we will always say, oh, this is religious issue, right? But no, actually, those feminists there, they were fighting for hijab is because they say that it is women's right. And those who are fighting are also non-Muslim, actually. They are from the church, from the Coptic church. So that's why I'm trying to say that some values which we think Islamic actually is not Islamic in terms of jurisprudence. It's also the needs for the society, as what Ustaz has said, is rahmatan lil alamin. And that's where I really understand that from their school of thought, which is Maturidi, every time it's more about the benefit of the society first and the needs of the society, then they're supported by religious scriptures. And the importance of having a logical and sound argument is the most important thing. Supported, but also must be supported by religious scriptures, actually. Thank you.
Okay, of course, when we talk about religious education, actually there is wider reason as to why we think a certain way. There are various diversity of opinions when it comes to the approach to Islamic learning. So this diversity, we cannot clamp them down. It's good to have that diversity. But the very important thing I think in learning is to instill, sometimes it's not about changing the curriculum itself, but it's to instill the curiosity in students. And this is actually hugely missing, not in just madrasas, but also education system in general in Singapore. So these are some of the values that we can, inculcate in our students, encourage them to ask questions, encourage them to be curious, so that in the future they will be a bit more critically thinking.
Experience in madrasa, when we ask questions during my time, the ustazah will say jangan menjawab and jaga adab. Those things, it just stops people from questioning. And then at the end of the year, I still remember when there's a parents teacher meeting, the ustazah will say, dia banyak menjawab, dia banyak all those negative thoughts. And my mom will always say, did he pass the exam? Yes. Okay. So the term jangan menjawab, kurang hajar, when you question them, it's like kurang hajar, jangan menjawab, jaga adab. All these are terms which we need to refine back, actually. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have time for one last question? Any questions or comments, or you want to add on? Yes, please.
Assalamualaikum. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Afza. So basically, I have a few questions, but it's all pertaining the madrasah curriculum in a nutshell. So what are the reasons? Okay, as I was sitting here, I was thinking, what are the reasons that actually hinder or make madrasah or took madrasah so long to embrace changes? So what's the main reason, or what are the reasons? So so that's the first one. The second one is, why are the asatizahs not comfortable with being uncomfortable? Yeah. Why are they uncomfortable with being uncomfortable? And the third one is, do you think subjects like philosophy would be embraced or would be taken in as part of the madrasah curriculum? Because I've seen it taught in traditional seminaries, and why not in a secular state like Singapore? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Can you repeat the last question?
Philosophy. So
Okay.
will philosophy be introduced to the madrasah curriculum? Because it has been taught in traditional seminaries, but why not a secular state like Singapore? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Ready to take any responses?
Okay, so I think why does Madrasah took so long? That one, I think I'm not in the position to answer that actually. Yeah, but why I can answer the second question. Why we don't? Why is it being comfortable or being uncomfortable? Is it? It's just like herd mentality. We come to school together at the age of 7 years old. We studied together for 12 years. And then we continue our tertiary education in almost 3 post-popular, which is Azhar, Jordan, Medina, Yemen, Malaysia. So we are almost in our own bubble. And we are so comfortable with it. We think the world revolves around us. And I would just like to share my experience, okay? After I finished my A-level, I still remember most of my classmates were choosing Medina. And for me, I never want to study in Medina. And never want to study in Egypt. And I also never want to study in Malaysia because I want to try something new. And most of the remarks I've got from the Asatizah, from my friends, is like, if you were to study in Turkey, you become liberal. And at the age of 17 or 18, with such remarks, do you think you have the confidence to overcome such remarks? And that's where I told because I'm the type of person where if you say no, I will say yes. Yeah, I'm the type of person like that. So after that, I just go myself with 2 of my friends. We do have remarks. They just say that, oh, he's becoming liberal or Western or all this thing. You are not grounded to Islam. You don't follow the manhaj salafus salih. You don't follow the imams. Then like those slender remarks really destroy our confidence actually. But as time goes by, it makes me feel like, to be comfortable with things which is uncomfortable. They just need to say, they can just say. Yeah. I think that's the reason why Asatizah, they are not comfortable being uncomfortable because of the circles they are. Since 7 years old up to 24. Yeah, that's all.
I think why it takes so long for us to reform sometimes is because of fear of change. Fear is irrational but also valid lah. And also partly because of the different contestations of ideas about religious learning. So which one is the best, right? That is probably the reason why it's taking long. On the question of philosophy, I was thinking it's best if we can introduce that in madrasas, but practically we also know that madrasas' education system is overloaded with so many subjects, and every one of them being examined. If you ask me, do some of the subjects need to be examined? I don't think so. Religious teaching, religious learning, for example, I don't think exams are necessary because the important KPIs is actually understanding and inquisitiveness. But that's not the case now. But speaking of philosophy, in fact, if you learn fiqh and if you learn tawheed, all of the things that I mentioned before, there are philosophical determinations, right? That determine the values in you deciding certain fiqh principles. So instead of maybe having to introduce philosophy as a major subject, you can also go deeper into specific subjects that we are now learning. Yeah, I think that's all from me.
Instead of philosophy, I think we can at least indirectly introduce to the ilmu kalam. It's at least a way for them to understand philosophy from the Islamic perspective. And why is Islamic perspective? Because kalam is, most of the scholars are Muslims. And the kalam is not in the, academic, secular world, there's no kalam. It's always about philosophy, actually. But kalam is a good way, it's a gateway for them to understand the logical reasons behind the rights of the religion. Yeah.
If I may, Brother Shafiq, actually, we did learn Ilmul Kalam in Al-Junaid. Just want to mention that maybe my answers since the beginning until now, it sounded like Madrasah Al-Junaid was not a very good madrasah and everything. I need to explain to you that when I reached Egypt, the education level and understanding that students from Madrasah Al-Junaid had was very high, and a lot of my doctora and my lecturers, they were very impressed with the level of education that we have and understanding. It seems like Madrasah Al-Junaid from early on, they were quite focused, and they know what they wanted. They wanted to provide or produce ulama warathatul anbiya. They wanted to produce scholars who are the successors of prophets. So they had that clearly. The problem is that where integration comes in, where is the need, what is the change was needed after that. The problem with the integration then is that you neither produce this nor that. That's the problem and the question that where it can be improved. Our religious knowledge, I would say, in Madrasah Al-Junaid during my time was very good. It was very high, and I dare say that we were the Raffles of Islamic schools at that time, of Islamic knowledge, and I take pride in that. And some of the Madrasah Al-Junaid students in Al-Azhar, we did get very high aggregates and marks in Al-Azhar, and we bring a different thoughts, actually, even because we had this contextualization, which was well received in a country like Egypt. Second thing, the question of the sister about bringing in philosophy. I think my hope for madrasa is actually to simplify for the primary school, actually to simplify even further the curriculum for primary school. I feel like it's very, very heavy. Yes, we want to produce maybe people who are equipped, or scholars who are equipped in both worldly matters and also religious matters. But I feel like learning matters like, wudu, the rukun, the meaning, like those kind of very, very intricate details. These are things that you will eventually memorize when you need it. You will eventually look into when you need it, but to be questioned and to be examined for that, I agree with Sister Shafiqah. I feel like it's not necessary. Instead, I think in the early age, I would go with what Ustaz Abdullah, actually, my Mudir, used to say, and I really take it very closely to the heart, is to instill religious awareness and love into the heart of our young Muslim learners. To just instill it. It's actually about understanding, and it's actually encourage them to ask questions when needed. The moment they start asking questions, whenever they need to do something, they are like, is this okay? Is this not okay? Where is Allah? Why is Allah like this? Why is this bad thing happening to me? These kind of things, even though we see it as like, this doesn't look like education, but it is. Because the moment they dare to ask this question at such a young age, and they will not be turned down, they would know that, oh, this religion actually has answers for everything. They wouldn't go and like, I shouldn't ask question about LGBTQ, I shouldn't ask question about gender, I shouldn't ask question about boyfriend, girlfriend. Anything is not trivial in Islam. Instead, if we have this inquisitive kind of learning in madrasa education, I think at a very young age, we can, in a way, I think, shape that curious mind that, inshallah, will benefit the community in the coming years. Inshallah.
Oh, thank you very much. I think, so we've run out of time. Please allow me a few more minutes for me to wrap up the entire discussion. But before I do the wrapping up, I actually will lead up to, because just now the question was, why is it taking so long? Everybody say I'm not in a position to answer. Everybody look at me, right? MUIS. Okay, come, let me answer for you. Okay, first, when we look at, already we know, we listen to the narratives surrounding the Asatizah fraternity the past few years. Everything also want Asatizah to do. Everything also, including areas which were not traditional, conventionally associated with the Asatizah roles, right? Everything also want to pile on the Asatizah. So one, we have to manage expectations, not just on the Asatizah themselves, but the community has expectations. So you have to not just change the mindset of the Asatizah, you have to change the mindset of the teachers of the Asatizah, you have to change the mindset of the community as well. Right? Because you have to manage their expectations. That's one. Second, okay, the teachers of the religious graduates, okay, what we have to look at, we have to take a step back. We looked at history, socio-historical perspective, which is very important. Maybe we should take a few more steps back and realize that we are facing an interim period whereby the teachers are basically a product of a system of education which in itself was a product of a colonial period, whereby there was a lot of intervention that took place in the face of religious education. Ustaz dah got kepala dia dah start balik dia punya PCICS class. Sekejap Ustaz So even during the colonial period, and we go even backwards, the feudal period, the way where you listen, you just follow, whatever the leader say, you just ikut, right? That mentality was not undone. The colonial period came in, intervention to the religious education. You look at the Islamic age of the golden age of Islam, whereby everything, all the scholars were polymath. There was no such thing as binaries. You don't try to disrupt the two. But colonial education had a purpose. During that time where they intervened, they knew that religion had a strong catalyst. It could be a strong catalyst for social mobilization to go against their rule. So what do? Religious education? Try to remove the parts which are dangerous, reinforce the parts which are, we can still give the impression of the community that, your religion is still being protected, but don't think. Realize that the product, the current situation we're facing is actually part of the product of that time, which is still not undone. Right? So all the way here. So we need to realize that this is why it takes time. I'm trying to undo centuries and decades upon centuries of, the changes to religious education. But now, as you can see in the panel, as you can see the people in this room who are interested, this is starting, just about starting. So we need to channel the resources accordingly, right? To equip the people. It will take time. And from a bureaucratic point of view, just to get some papers approved all the way up, it just gets so complicated. You have to take into consideration stakeholders and then the bureaucratization of religion. It's a huge mess. It takes time, but the main point is, as you highlighted, you have to be patient. You have to be patient and you need to have the motivation to continue, to collaborate beyond what is just there. We have to look beyond the classroom. Islamic education, as they have also pointed out, is no longer just about your textbooks, your classrooms. You have to go out, you have to speak to other people. You have to tap on the knowledge which is out there, which can help for the betterment of socio-religious life of the community, right? Which goes back to the point about why do you not introduce philosophy on top of the, how many subjects, I don't know, during religious education. I salute you guys. I want to die already. But the reason is actually very practical sometimes. You're living in Singapore. Let me just tell you, when you are the first person in your family to go to MUIS, right? And then you tell your family, okay, I want to go to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. You know what was the first question? Ni bukan tu The first question was like, kau nak makan apa lepas tu? Right? You could have gone to law, you didn't, you go faculty. You want to study philosophy, habis. The practical is a systemic. And then we go back to the point, okay, so this is Singapore, it's about manpower, it's about labor, demand and supply, right? So now you want Asatizah to do everything. What are we really doing about the ecosystem? How about the salaries? But if you want to increase the salaries, you have to talk the language of the country, meaning you have to make sure that the skills are comparable. You have to master all the confidence that you have to actually bring out, that knowledge that you have, the spirit and the power and the thinking, the critical thinking that you have, to actually put forth and say, look, I demand this salary because I deserve it. But we need to prove it. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay? So I shall end off with 3 points. Thank you so much to the speakers. I just wanted to end off with this. It might be triggering, but we can continue the conversation later on. Bring more friends so we can have a bigger interaction. One is about, as I mentioned, making the ecosystem attractive. Low salaries as a key factor, right? This is a problem. This is definitely a problem. You want to put all the expectations, these people need to eat. They are fellow Singaporeans. Singapore is so expensive, it's getting more and more expensive. Let's just be practical about it. Second, just now we mentioned about the madrasas, about what was the purpose. Madrasah Al-Junaid at that point of time was really focused on wanting to produce scholars. Then we realized JMS system has a purpose actually, because certain madrasas are now focused on producing certain kinds of graduates, right? Now revisit the point about what is the purpose of the madrasah today. Why are people that question the very first presentation, why is there a rising demand for madrasah? Is it really because these people put in their child because they want to produce more scholars? I'm so sorry, ladies and gentlemen, the answer is no. They want the Islamic environment. But some of them do want to send their children in to produce future scholars, future asatizah in religious leadership. Are we doing justice to the resources that are being pumped in? So do we need to look at the purpose of the madrasah system in the first place, cater accordingly and channel the funds properly, right? And so that my last point before we end today is really, what are we going to do about the attrition? What are we going to do about this layer of Asatizahs I mentioned earlier, or religious graduates who felt that they were being targeted or discriminated against because they asked questions in the past? Now they are actually the ones who are the thinkers. But because the ecosystem is not good for them, the salaries are low, they go out and they don't want to apply for tier 1 Asatizah. Right? They don't want, because why must go and sit through PCICS? You can ask my dear friends here. There are so many, okay, dah kena target dah. But, okay, I shall close. We have the discussion outside. But really, the brain drain, the attrition that is happening, we may look at it at a very practical level, but really we need that mentorship from the people who've gone through the system, not from outside. People who have gone through the system, navigated the system, and really understood that Islamic education is not just about the classroom and the textbooks, but it's really all-encompassing. And with that, I thank you all so much. If anybody wants to continue the discussion, by all means after this. Thank you to the organizers. And yeah, thank you all of you for all your questions and your active participation. I see everybody is still sitting and not sleeping. With that, I shall send it back to the MC. Thank you.